Hi, this is Caleb Heymann, Director of Photography of the Fear Street trilogy, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Caleb Heymann, Director of Photography of the entire trilogy of Fear Street on Netflix. Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ben. Great to be here.
I cannot wait to dive into this with you. You had to create three completely different looks for three different time periods. Like, there's just so much going on here. And I heard the production schedule was insane. So there's a lot to talk about, and we'll get to all of it. But before we get there, I just want to mention MZ Empowering Filmmakers. They're sponsoring the show. We love them, and we're going to talk more about them later in the episode. Of course, follow us on your favorite podcast app, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And also, gocreativeshow.com, where you can find all things Go Creative Show. So, Caleb, what a cool series. I was telling you earlier, I watched most of them. I saw all of the second episode, most of the first one, and most of the third one, too. There's a lot there. I mean, it's three complete films in a trilogy, all shot at the same time. And I was doing a little bit of research on your just production schedule. And wow, what an insane schedule you had. And I'd love for you to share that with our audience, because I know we can all relate here at Go Creative Show about crazy, ridiculous, insane production schedules. This one sounds crazy. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it was pretty bonkers. It was a 106-day shoot, which meant on average we had only about 35 days per film. And each film had some pretty intense complexities to deal with. And on top of that, it was just kind of treated as one big production from the get-go. And that was partly just to maintain the momentum of the crew so that we didn't have people leaving halfway if we had to go down for a few weeks and go back into prep. They decided from the get-go they're just going to treat it as one big film. And, so we didn't actually have that much prep heading into it. We had 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks. I think, Lee had a bit more, but I came out there 6 weeks in advance and initially was just going to be shooting 2 of the 3 films. So that's what I was prepping initially 1994 and 1666. And 6 weeks, was not a ton of prep time, to be going into what at the time I thought was going to be about 67 or 69 days of shooting. And that was the world of 1994 and the world of 1666. And we literally went straight through from one into the other one without a single day off. So, you're kind of having to tech scout, in our case, in early February for locations that you're going to be returning back to in an entirely different season. And in some cases, like at the Village, we're scouting it when it's just an empty field that we've kind of put up some wireframes, and you're having to kind of like make these decisions that are going to impact you months and months down the road when you return back to it to eventually shoot.
That's crazy. So just to bring people up to speed, the films are a trilogy, a recreation of an R.L. Stine trilogy of books. Yeah. So there's 3 parts. The first part is in 1994. The second part is in 1978. And then the third part is in 1666. So when you're doing your prep and you're going into this thinking you're shooting 1994 and 1666, you're doing all of your location scouting. Everything is at the beginning for both of those movies, or ended up being all of those movies. So That's kind of interesting because, like you said, you're prepping months in advance. You're basically doing a whole film before you even get to the one that you're prepping for.
Yeah.
It's insane to me that you guys were able to do this all in 6 weeks.
It was a lot. And, it was already intimidating to come into this project in a way, it being my first big studio feature, having come out of a background of doing kind of smaller, independent stuff, initially documentaries and then smaller indie films. And then the first kind of, bigger project I was on was Stranger Things season 3, where I was doing second unit. But now here I was, coming on as the main DP, and it was like, here all of a sudden there's two films and then eventually three films to tackle all at the same time that were, all of at a pretty decent scale, and with a pretty huge scope to them. So it was a really exciting challenge. But yeah, it's also hard when, for the stuff in 1666, we're having to basically kind of go walk through the locations, do a bit of prep work, sign off on set designs and that kind of stuff, knowing that the script is going to change a fair amount in the intervening months.
Yeah.
But there's certain decisions you need to make early on during that prep phase. And of course, we hadn't had any time to shot list or anything like that. So we basically, in the world of prep, we went through in kind of more of a linear way. You start going through the script with Lee and our amazing AD, Doug Torres, who's got his own great podcast, the Film Roundtable. And he was our AD and is just really masterful in helping us approach this.
And the lead that you're talking about is the director, Lee Janiak. So just to get everybody up to speed on that.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had more time to shot list for 1994 and to plan out, especially those first sort of 4 or 5 weeks of shooting.
Yeah.
And then everything beyond that point got a little sketchier because you just physically run out of time. And of course, the director's dealing with so much stuff every day that you're just hoping to get a few hours here and there with them when you can. But fortunately, we already knew 1666 was going to be handheld and that was going to be kind of working in our favor and that we were going to have a different treatment for that film and we were going to have to take a different approach, but that approach was what we wanted creatively anyways. And it was going to allow us to kind of like roll with it a little bit. And then, of course, you're working on weekends, too, to kind of figure it out as you go.
Without a day off, and you mean like no days off, meaning you're also working the weekends. Like this isn't no work days off. This is no days off.
We have, we're on 5-day weeks, but, with so much nights in our schedule, inevitably by the time, you start your early morning on Monday, your early call, by the time Friday runs around, if you're not on a full-on hard night shoot, you're on a split. You're going past midnight one way or the other, and often you're going right through. So that carries into Saturday morning, and then Saturday is your kind of day to scramble to catch up with a bit of laundry and grocery shopping, what have you. And then Sunday you're meeting up with in our case Lee and Doug, and start to try and wrap our minds around the week coming up as a group, and then we all kind of go off and have our own individual concerns. And, that's really the only way to do it is to do it 1 week at a time. I mean, there's certain things that you do need to plan out beyond that. But as far as really, getting more into the proper planning and more granular with it, it works a lot better if you can just kind of break it off 1 week at a time. But it does mean a bit of work on the weekends.
Do you think that this being your first large-scale feature film project, do you think you were kind of more prepared in a way to be less prepared, if you will? You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily know what to compare it to. You haven't gone through this experience before. And I assume that some of the work, especially if you're doing documentary, you're able to kind of make things out of nothing and kind of approach a day without a plan and make it work. I mean, did you feel like those skills came in really handy for the fact that you had very little prep time?
I didn't think about it, but I think that there's probably something to that about being, able to roll with things and sort of adapt as you have to do in documentaries. And it really came in with 1666 as far as working a lot with natural light, window light, and just being very, very, very nimble, even though we were a big machine. There were a lot of trucks parked, and it's always humbling to walk from base camp to set and just see the rows and rows and rows of trucks and how many people go into whose hard work goes into pulling off something of this nature, and then, so yeah, it was pretty special, but I think maybe that's partly why Lee wanted to take a chance on me, because she probably knew I could get a little scrappy, and we had to go, we were averaging, our script supervisor said we ended up averaging somewhere around 38 to 39 setups per day.
Oh my
So it
God.
was really grueling, and that's including B camera. But it was a lot. It was, and I mean, her style of filmmaking and editing, Lee knew that it was going to be this fast paced, it's very hungry for shots. And we had to move along at a pretty crazy clip, which also dictate a lot of the decisions that you make as far as how you're going to be lighting and just sort of approaching each day.
Well, let's talk about the differerences and nuances in each of these films. And I'd like to kind of start from the end when you are representing 1666 in part 3.
Mm-hmm.
This to me seems like it could potentially be the most challenging. And I'm curious on your opinion of this, because, you're at a time period where there are no lights, there's no electricity. You have to work with daylight and candlelight and make it look real. And you sort of have to hide the fact that you're lighting things. So I'm always kind of amazed by films that are representing this time period, because you don't have the luxury of practicals.
Yeah, I know. And, after we had literally spent about the last 7 or 8 days in 1994 location work in the food court of a mall, that was blacked out so we could go day for night. And all of our lighting inside was UV, which is really hard on the eyes. It was a mix of super blues and UVs and the neons. It's like the most artificial that you can possibly get and really hard on the eyes. And then we literally went the next morning to this village. And it was Monday night, we wrapped in that mall. And Tuesday morning, we started out in the village.
Oh my God.
Could not be more different, and we're handheld, but, none of that artificial lighting comes into play, of course. So it was exhilarating. I mean, it was refreshing, and it was really fun after having been cooped up in that mall for so long and straining the eyes under those super blue lights and everything, to be able to just like step out. And now you've just got this incredible set that Scott Cusio and Sean Brennan had created for us, and their whole team and art department. Obviously we had done tests again, like probably 4 months ago, when we were actually prepping and doing things like tests, about, double wick candles versus triple wick candles, different types of oil candles. So we kind of landed on the double wicks that we liked. We tested out a number of lanterns that we knew we were going to be using inside, mostly at night.
And when you say double wick candles, you're talking about just literally the amount of flames on the candle and how bright that is? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So it's got like 2 wicks that I think are basically coiled around each other. So you do get, you get at least twice as much light, if not more. And you can get up to triple wick, which get a little ridiculous. They're like a full-on torch. But the double wicks we thought were really nice. And, so they had to order, I don't know, thousands of them probably. And then we tested out different types of lantern torches. And we did all that stuff kind of like early on, and then a little bit as we were going in the world of 1994. So we wanted to get the most out of fire, which was our one, artificial light source that wasn't the sun or moon.
Yeah.
And and then of course the sets were designed with pretty nice window placement, which we, we did supplement, but a lot of it was working around sun path, having every flavor of ND gel hard cut out for every window, so that when we needed to add a stop or lose lose one stop or lose 2 or 3 stops, it was very quick to just sandwich those onto the window.
Yeah.
And be able to control, and modulate the light that way. So the day work was refreshingly simple compared to what we've been doing for 1994. one thing I was really worried about was the day exteriors in the town of Union,
What were
particularly
you
all the
concerned with?
stuff. Well, when you have to shoot, like a 4-page scene that you're going to be shooting all day, and you want it to look like Days of Heaven, but we don't have the luxury. I mean, the New World, Malick's film was a big reference for us.
Yeah.
We didn't have any kind of luxury of, we're going to go outside and we're going to just, shoot a few hours or shoot during magic hour, or even shoot late afternoon when the sun is better. Some days, just because of our schedule and all the other factors, that come into play, we'd have to shoot outside all day long from sun up to sundown. And now you need to be the one who can somehow do your best to make it all match. So that's always a big challenge. But what really helped was getting this construction crane that had a 40 by 60 foot sill that we were able to basically arm out over the set and could kind of swing around from one end of the town to the other.
Yeah.
It would give us, this 40 by 60 foot of shade that also made the hot Georgia summers tolerable for the cast, but it took the edge off the sun. So we found that, as long as you can really kind of control the light on your actors, even if you're not shooting into backlight, like you would want to be, as long as you control the light on them, you have more flexibility in the background to kind of pull it down later. And so much of it lives in mediums and in close-ups. So that was a great tool to us, because we were able to send that over, and then we were able to bring in some negative fill so we could make it look a little darker, because we always wanted those shadows everywhere we went.
Yeah.
And we would add, different filters to the cameras. We wanted to go cooler, to kind of muck it up a little bit. But yeah, I think we would have been kind of screwed without that, big old silk overhead.
Let's talk about the camera and the filtration for the part 3, 1666. You said you had tested a few months prior. I guess my question is, did you stay with the same camera package for all 3, or was there something unique about 1666 because you knew you were dealing with natural light all the time?
Yeah, we stayed with the same camera package throughout, which was the Alexa Mini. And we had 2 of them, not the LF version, just the original version, which works really nice in anamorphic mode, because we knew from the get-go that we wanted to be anamorphic, hearkening back to films like Scream and a lot of the classics of the 90s that were big influences for us. And initially we thought maybe changing up the lenses, but then I went into Panavision and was very, very fortunate to be in a conversation with Dan Sasaki, who was showing me how with the T-series lenses, he actually has all these parameters that he can manipulate to create different looks out of one set of lenses. So the pitch was like, we're going to shoot everything on the T-series, but we're going to be able to tune them differently so that we have different flares for the 70s, and we have, more halation, and we have, different lower contrast for 1666. And you can control how quickly the focus falls off at the edges, so that 1994 was not the most pristine version of the T-series. He'd already detuned them, but then he would just escalate that, for the other time periods. And then, which was really cool, that he was able to do that for us, and that Panavision was able to support us like that. And they also did some other cool stuff with some custom lenses, which we could talk about if you like. But we also did some stuff with filtration at the camera level to differentiate the look.
Well, for 1666 particularly, you had just mentioned you were adding some filtration in order to give you that contrast that you wanted, make things a little cooler looking. Tell me about that. What did you end up choosing and why?
So I chose the Locon filters, partly just to accentuate what we were already going for. The Locon filters, they just scatter the light around so that your shadows get a little, milked up by your highlights. It all kind of bounces around, almost like what would happen if you use, an older lens with older coatings. You would have some of that naturally. So I wanted to just kind of like, push that. So we had the low cons as things took a darker turn in the town, as, the crap starts hitting the fan. We started introducing the cyan filters in front of the camera, which was a way of kind of baking in a cooler look. It allows you to you could obviously, take your color temp down to 2600 Kelvin or something like that if you wanted to, which we were also doing at times. But the color filters also allowed us to push the cools a little bit further, and particularly into that cyan zone.
Yeah.
And then, beyond that, the rest of it was really on the lighting side. I mean, for 1978, we decided to push everything a stop. So instead of using 800 as our base, we used 1600 ISO as our base, just to really lean into the grain.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it was really production design first and foremost, and then things we did on the lighting and color side that differentiated.
This is how stupid I am. You're saying low con filter. I'm spelling it out. LOCON filter. I'm like, what the hell is a low con filter? Low contrast is what you were talking about.
Oh, yeah, right? You have, for a Google search, you probably, my bad.
That's
low
my problem.
Filter.
I was looking at, I'm like, is there a brand called low con? What am I looking at?
Oh, yeah.
So,
No, I think it's Schneider, yeah.
Low cost. So low contrast filters. Yes. And I really love the look of 1666. I think it looked so cool because you had just seen the previous two, and now it's almost like completely devoid of color. I feel like as a series, it goes from tons and tons of color in 1994 to sort of a muted 70s, like almost everything's kind of a warm look in 78. And then basically like no color when you get to the 1600s.
Yeah.
So I thought that was such a great choice as you go back in time to sort of lose color there. I do want to move on to the 1970s one, but you had mentioned a few minutes ago, you were just about to talk about shooting day interiors or even night interiors in 1666 without having the luxury of practical lights. I'd love to just spend a minute on that and kind of how you approach that, because that's something that a lot of us don't really get an opportunity to do, represent a situation that doesn't have electricity. So I'm curious how you solved that problem to make it look real.
Yeah. I mean, the first prize is to use actual fire, like propane bars, which we did. We managed to use those in a couple situations on talking about interiors.
And what are those, the propane bars?
They're just like the special effects department provides them. And it's maybe like, I don't know, about a 4 foot long, metal bar that is propane fueled and allows you to modulate however much flame you want to come out of it. So you get a practical flame. You have to have fire safety and all the works of it. And, depending on what you're doing, it can be a bit noisy. So it's not for every situation, but we use those sometimes off camera to enhance the natural light that we were getting from a fire or from candles. When we were able to use a bunch of double wick candles, we would do that. But I also always had, kind of ironically, the latest technology, RGB LED lights as well. I mean, I use the Titan tubes a lot on this, the Astera Titans in all time periods. So those are kind of a workhorse, and we had them in all kinds of configurations. We had them where they were kind of clipped onto Coroplast boards that they were bounced off of. So they had those little Kino clip holders that would bounce them off the boards. You'd have a bounce source, and you could put either 2 or 3 of them on, get like a big 4 foot by 4 foot approximately light source, and then muslin on the outside of it. So it'd be bounce and then diffuse, like a little mini book light. And we had those in various shapes and sizes and used those a whole bunch. And that was great because you could put them into pixel mode and they would have, you could create a fire flicker effect where it would kind of dance around, the board and not always be coming from the same place. So it'd be flickering in a kind of dynamic way. And you could just dial in the amount of warmth that you wanted, matching to the practicals. And so, even though some people kind of want to stick to actual tungsten units for period work, we kind of embraced the opposite, and went with the units that gave us the most flexibility and don't need power, so they're very quick to move around. And then we also had some cool custom covered wagons and such that our gaffer Dan Murphy made, that had a bunch of little practicals in them, actual tungsten practicals, tied to a flicker box, kind of like an older gag that we would every once in a while use, but we use the Titans a lot.
So I just want to make sure I understand your use case for those Titans, because I've seen like the little Kino rings. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like you have the little
Kino
brackets
clip.
the clips, the little brackets that you can slip them in. But you're saying you're turning them and they're facing the board so that there's no light emitting from the back of it. You're using just the board as a bounce.
Well, the nice thing is so the Kino clips are holding the Titan tube onto the chloroplast, and then you can rotate the tubes so that they're bouncing into the board. Or if you want a little bit more, because the tubes only illuminate on half the side of the Titans, or you can spin them out direct and just push straight through the muslin if you want a little bit more stop, but not quite as soft of a light source. So they were great. I mean, we used them for all kinds of stuff.
That's a cool idea. I've seen them placed on, different surfaces, but never reversed and turned toward the surface and just using it purely as like a bounce or a book light. That's a really cool idea. I like that as an interesting.
I'll send you some photos.
Yeah. If you've got photos of that, please do, because I'd love to put that in the show notes. I'm sure the audience would like to see that. So that's awesome.
That was actually something that we brought over from Stranger Things that I believe was developed for Tim Ives initially. And that, the gaffer who did the first two Fear Street movies had some of those, kind of left over from that. So we kind of stole them and made some, modifications, and the smaller ones came out and we made a range of sizes. But sorry, not to geek out too much into the tech side of it. But.
I mean, this is a Go Creative show. This is what it's for. If you ain't a lighting geek, this is not your show.
Fair enough.
Exactly. No, I love that. And I'd love to see pictures of that too. So let's transition to, which one do you want to talk about next? We've got 78 and we have 94. What do you want to get into?
I think we've already kind of, touched upon some of the differences for, what we did differently with 1666 based on 1994. In 1994, just to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so 1994 is the first one. Mm-hmm. It's by far the most colorful. And that one in particular is the one that's definitely giving me like vibes of Scream and old like 90s horror. And we actually have a question from Nicole on Instagram, one of our listeners, asking what horror movies inspired the look of the series. Now, obviously, there's a million looks. So let's just pinpoint that into 94 and kind of use that as a launching point for the discussion.
Great. Yeah. I mean, it's clear when you read the script within the first 5 pages that Scream, is a big influence here. And that was really exciting for both me and Lee, because we both grew up in the 90s and, hanging out in shopping malls and food courts and Spencer Gifts and crap like that. It's like,
wasn't it the best?
Where you went to hang out as a kid, best/worst. Yeah.
I know. I think it's best/best. Those days I remember fondly. I love hanging out in malls.
The Orange
like
Julius
a mall? Orange.
So
I love a mall.
It was so much fun to get to create that era, that we obviously grew up in, and also doing an homage to films of that era, which I saw as a high school in the mall, watching Scream, or even I Know What You Did Last Summer, films like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, Scream was the kind of classic reference, especially, you know, because who you think is going to be the hero gets killed off within 5 minutes. And it was clearly tipping the hat toward that, and the whole design of the skull mask character and all that.
Yeah.
Very clearly a nod to Scream. So I didn't feel the need to kind of beat it over the head with like building the look of the, you know, lighting and such or color use around what they had done in that film. We already had this idea that 1994 was going to be more the technology of that era that you would associate with, you know, kind of cinematic films of that era. The Technocranes technically hadn't been invented yet, but we were going with cranes, with dollies, and with Steadicam. And there wasn't going to be a lot of handheld, and it was going to be a very big in-your-face soundtrack, and it was going to be a high-energy edit. And it was kind of, you know, I guess what, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a cinematic example from the 90s of something a little bit more mainstream might look and feel like. But I really wanted to push the color, you know, in this, there were all these opportunities in the script and all these great practicals that like Jess Royale, our set deck gave us to work with, you know, that allowed us to create this really bold color palette to that film, knowing, like you say, that was going to be just, you know, stripped away as you work your way through the time periods. You're going to lose a lot of those colors. And then at the end of part 3, at the end of the 1666 film, you round trip back to 1994, part 2, spoiler alert. And there's a whole even bigger explosion of color. So, you know, we just wanted to have fun with that, basically. And I really like the way that some of these places, shopping malls, looked at night. That cityscapes, shopping malls, certain industrial, you know, or big box stores. You know, when you come at night and all the lights are off, and you've just got, you know, all these shiny surfaces, but some really saturated lights to bounce around all over the place. You know, I thought it was, to me, the most interesting look that you could create. So we wanted to lean into that, and obviously having a shopping mall that's closing up at night, you can kind of justify a lot of the lights being off. And, you know, everywhere we went, that was kind of my MO, is like, what lights, you know, can I switch off the lights that are not interesting? You know, like in the school, the overheads are off. And, you know, you justify it as being shady side, that everything's broken and that they can't afford to keep the lights on. And then, you know, again, for the grocery store, it was a kind of similar scenario where they're coming in at night. So we're saying, let's just basically shut off all the overheads that aren't very interesting, and then lean into these, you know, practicals that create little pockets of color.
And we're talking about, and for the people that haven't seen it, we're talking about a lot of neon. We're talking about a lot of store signs. Like, you know, if you can imagine walking through a mall and seeing the name of the store lit up, you know, backlit.
Sam Goody
Hey, Sam, exactly. That's the type of lighting that we're seeing throughout the mall at night. So it's not like pitch black, but it's kind of the lights that never shut off. And I think you guys, I love the leaning into that. And it's funny too, because I didn't know you were second unit of Stranger Things. And Stranger Things, so much of that took place in that mall as well. You just can't get out of the damn mall, can you?
I know. There were a lot of, you know, similarities that, you know, felt like, you know, one project. They were obviously very distinctive, but in a lot of ways they bled over, and sometimes you'd get a little confused. Wait, have we done this before? Have we not done this before? Because it's a lot of the same people, a lot of the same different production designers, but a lot of the same art department. You know, Jess, who I mentioned, and Sean Brennan, both work on Stranger Things as well. You know, I was kind of the new guy in Stranger Things. They'd been there since season 1. I was kind of the one who just came on to do second unit. And then, I was lucky enough to, you know, continue working.
Now you're shooting, Lee, are you shooting season 4? Are you the DP for season 4?
Yeah. I mean, Lucky's on it, was on it. He finished up several months ago. I just finished last week, actually.
Oh, wow.
After, it was I mean, 11 months of pretty nonstop work since we started up again in August post-COVID, and just wrapped last week. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, you must be so psyched. What a great franchise to be part of.
Oh,
or series, I should say.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well,
really
back to Fear Street. I knew we couldn't get through a discussion without talking about Stranger Things for a second. But all right, so we're back. We're in 1994. Lots of color. We've got to talk about what my favorite kill was, and I'm curious what your favorite kill was from the series. But this bread machine, the bread slicer kill, is insane. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. They slide a person's head through a bread slicer, and it doesn't go well. Spoiler alert. So I'd love to talk to you about this grocery store scene. This one seems to have been the most challenging scene, or at least one of. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on kind of how you pulled it all together. What were some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of the scenes that, from the script phase, we read it and knew that, that it had the potential to be really awesome, but it was controversial as to whether or not this was even something that we should be entertaining, trying to do. There were pushbacks, like I think Scott and Sean, from Art, were like, wait a minute, now would this really happen? And to their credit, they really like things to be grounded in reality, which really helps with these crazy far-flung series, to have that grounding. And so we did an actual test. They went out and bought, the exact old school, bread slicer unit that we were going to be using, when we shot it a couple months later. And they bought some melons and brought in some watermelons, and it was a big moment, because I think if it didn't do anything to the watermelon, then they were going to win. And I mean, I don't know. It's hard to imagine Lee giving that one up, because she knew it was going to be awesome, and she really wanted to do it. So sure enough, when you push the watermelon through the bread slicer, the watermelon, was sliced into fairly neat, chunks, and it made it pretty much all the way through. And it was just like this crazy, like, eruption of, hugs and high fives afterwards. And Lee was like, hell yeah, we're doing it. She would have done it either way, I bet. But now she was, that much more vindicated to go ahead with this crazy plan. And, there was like, yeah, I mean, the whole sequence was, crazy to shoot, because you're rolling multiple cameras. You're constantly changing out from your stunt Kate to your real Kate, played by Julia, who was just amazing throughout the whole sequence. And then you've got the smash into the cake to deal with. And then, it happens once with stunts, and then you have to recreate that. Or it happened first time with our real Kate, with Julia. And then you have to recreate that with, your stunt actress. And it's just, and then eventually we got to the kill, and there was it was a bit technical. We wanted that very Fincher-like precision, to juxtapose with all these crazy handheld shots of the fight, and then you're just moving laterally along, tracking with the head, and the sort of feeling of inevitability, as it goes, and you feel the bread slice. We got that from a couple different angles. And there was actually a prosthetic head that had been molded to match her head, and filled with whatever was going to resemble brains. And that one, it was a lot of work. Didn't get a whole lot out of it, unfortunately. I think it ended up becoming more of a visual effects thing. But so you get the plate of, Julia, the actress, going through her real, just so they have a map of like what her face looks like, intact under the lighting. And then we got all clean plates and all sorts of things, and had, I think, some practical blood splatter happening, but obviously, at a certain point, you're like, okay, cool, we've done our best. Now we're handing it over to visual effects to, to touch up the rest of it, to enhance the blood. I mean, we were actually throwing blood onto loaves of white France bread and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Because that was apparently all inspired by Lee's days as a teenager working at Kmart and coming up
No
with like
way.
crazy stuff, these kind of suburban industrial, these suburban retail settings late at night and thinking about how it could all go wrong.
Let's take a quick break and talk about MZ empowering filmmakers. Now, we talk about MZ every single week, and I absolutely love them, especially during the pandemic when everybody was at home. You needed to use that time wisely. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where I got introduced to MZ. I mean, I knew about them before, but where I really started digging in was during that time because I had a lot of free time on my hands and I wanted to use it to hone my craft. And that's what MZ is all about. That's why their whole slogan is now empowering filmmakers, because that really is what they do. So you can think about MZ like a giant library, like a Netflix for filmmaking education. It is just packed with hours and hours and hours of really high quality video-based filmmaking education covering all things like directing, cinematography, post-production, visual storytelling, and more. And first of all, the quality of the courses are really high-end. You've got great courses with information we all need to know, but they're also taught by people working in the industry, actually working in the industry. I'm talking about Vincent Laforet, Shane Hurlbut, Philip Bloom, Tom Cross, the editor of La La Land and Whiplash, award-winning editor, has a whole course on the art and technique of film editing. So there's so much there. In fact, one of their more recent courses is called Indie Film Blueprint, which is basically a roadmap on how to plan and sell your first indie feature, which is like, who doesn't need to know that? So it's all there at MZ. So the way you get there is you go to gocreativeshow.com/MZ, MZED. And on checkout, remember to put in GCS20, so you can get 20% off your purchase of an individual course or the MZ Pro membership, which is what I recommend and what I do for myself. So you should check that out. So it's all there. gocreativeshow.com/MZ. Well, aside from the gruesome bread death, you also had just a lot going on by way of lighting in that scene. And, when I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, you either completely threw away the rule book, quote unquote, about how to properly light skin, or you're somehow kind of balancing your colors to make it work, because everyone still looked great, but they were completely drenched in a million different colored lights. Like, just the consistency alone must be a challenge. And I'd love to hear from you about how exactly you approach the fact that your skin tones were going to always be all over the place because you're lighting them with crazy colored lights.
Yeah. I mean, we one of the reasons why we picked the Alexa fairly early on was, we did tests with the craziest, most saturated lights and neons, and UV lights, and saw how it would handle those pretty far-flung colors. And I mean, the other cameras that, are right up there with it, they're all really phenomenal at this point, but the Alexa just did such a great job. It's hard to break it, basically.
Yeah.
And so going into the grocery store, we knew that we were going to basically establish different looks in different sections of the grocery store. The pharmacy would be, more warm light with cool accents. The back room where the meat freezer is and all that would have red light with a bit of blue. And then the lobster tank area, the seafood area, was going to be this kind of neon pink and blue light that kind of went with this whole color contrast motif of Sam and Dina always having some crazy color contrast. And then the bakery area where the blood slicer was more of a cool base, but with warm accents. So you just kind of flip the ratio of what you're doing in the pharmacy. Because the hope was that, they all feel like they're in the same location, but each one has a slightly different kind of color signature that immediately kind of tells you where you're at, even if you're coming in on a close-up. you kind of already start to orient yourself in the grocery store around the colors. And we did
What
a
I was
kind of similar
curious
thing in the
about,
mall.
what I
Mm-hmm.
was curious about is are things like highlights. Like, are you
Mm-hmm.
adding colored highlights, or are you doing like
Mm-hmm.
more of a traditional light in the eyes? Are you even worrying at all about having just like, tungsten or daylight color on skin, or are you just purely going with the colors that are in the room?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, we're pretty much just going with the colors that are in the room. If you have a scene like with Sam and Dina where they're going to be talking for like 4 minutes, you try to not only have some, we try to have a nice kind of, more kind of conventional warm key light that's kind of serving them both. But then for all the stuff that's a little bit more action oriented and all over the place, be a little bit more bold about that.
Yeah.
I mean, generally will try to have an eye light, if it feels needed. I mean, try to kind of like just wrap the key light, kind of often starting with the backlight and then kind of, work and then kind of wrapping it around into like a kind of a far side key light. And if that's not already getting an eye light, just kind of adding a little something next to it, to a little closer to camera that's going to ping the eye. And then we started doing it sometimes like this kind of crazy, because like over at the seafood sign where you had the hot pink and the neon blue of that sign,
Yeah.
it's like, well, let's just see if we can go with those two colors on the key side of the face. And we found that just by like separating them out a little bit, or having one higher and one lower, or having a flag in between, you kind of get this interesting dimensionality of color on a face where like, the pink might be hitting the cheekbones and the crazy blue light is more hitting underneath that, filling in the shadows or something to that effect. So that was kind of fun to experiment with, which if you just had kind of more normal lights, like one that's a little warm and one that's a little cool, they would just average out. But because we were dealing with these really extreme differences, you could actually kind of get a look out of that. And then in the bakery, we just like rigged lights all around the bakery. So we kind of had a 360-degree, those Titans in Kino housings rigged into the ceiling, so we didn't have to run power in probably like, I don't know, 15 of them just around the set, so that whenever we would turn around, it was just a matter of switching off whatever ones were behind the camera and then kind of picking, okay, this one here is going to pick up the face with something warm. And then these other ones are all going to do like a cool edge from the other side. And you could just change the color on a dime. So it allowed us to move fast, but always kind of have that strong color contrast.
I'm like fascinated with this because right now I'm dealing with a project that is in pre-production that is all about color. Like the client wants a ton of different colors. And we're starting to realize that once you have multiple colors in the same space, they kind of turn into other colors. Like as they blend, it's really tough to keep separation. Because we're in our particular situation, we have a big, huge white cyc, and we need to find a way to get multiple colors on the white cyc. But we're finding in testing that the colors are blending, and we're not actually getting the colors we need. And we're dealing with a brand, so we have very specific brand color guidelines. So watching, this your film, I'm like, I was looking at the faces, and I'm like, God damn, they have great separation of the 2 or 3 different colors on skin tones and on walls and stuff. So it's interesting to hear that you're actually separating them with some black or what Duvetine or whatever it was that you're doing. I think that's so cool and so interesting because that is a challenge that we were not anticipating.
It's kind of fun to play with. Yeah. And I mean, they shouldn't be right next to each other, but it definitely helps to have them on other ends of the color spectrum, to have a lot of, and then you can kind of do it. And, obviously we always go crazy with the backlights and be whatever color, but then you have to kind of think, okay, just how crazy do you want to go, on somebody's face? And of course all the actors look great and everything. Like they're, super, super easy to light, super easy to work with. But yeah, we really went for it with the color on 1994, to the point where it was really fun and satisfying to kind of go back to a little bit more stripped down palette, for 1666 and 1978, where it's not like the whole box of crayons anymore, you know?
Exactly. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you were employing some custom vintage lenses, not custom lenses. Vintage, I can't say the word, vintage lenses for the film.
Yeah.
How were you using those? And what were they?
We had we had these old Russian lenses that were called the Petzval lenses from like the late 50s that Dan at Panavision, Dan Sasaki was showing me, you know, when we were in the process of testing out funky lenses, knowing that we wanted to do something a little different for all these flashbacks and the moments where the witch's power is taking hold, to punctuate those. And so we just loved the look of those old lenses, and how, knowing that our framing was going to be center punched in those moments, then we could afford to have these lenses that had a crazy fall off to the edges. And those ones, the focus falls off in a very unique way. It's the swirly bokeh. You know, the further it goes to the corners, the more it becomes sort of warped in a sort of circular fashion. And so it's like, well, but we want to shoot anamorphic. So Dan actually was able to add anamorphic elements into like a custom housing to a couple of those guys. So we had a 58 and an 85 mil, you know, anamorphized Petzval lens, you know, Russian Petzval lens. And so those were our Ivan and Igor. They got nicknames. You know, we'd only bring those out and, you know, when it was time to do the witch possession moments. There were also a couple of funky portrait lenses, like a 75 mil old thing that they had off the shelf in Panavision that probably hadn't been used in a very long time, that we used for Sam's drugged out POV. Yeah. Just because we wanted to be quite, you know, rigorous with our, you know, consistent with our use of not touching the witch possession lenses unless it was an actual witch possession. Then she's just having an overdose. So we had that lens to bring out. So yeah, we just had, and then we brought in some zooms for the 70s film as well, because we wanted to switch it up, and, you know, I thought that would, you know, give it a really 70s look. And I love those
Petzval lenses. The look is so cool. And I know there's been a movement to have new ones created. I saw that there was a Kickstarter for that. Did you touch the new ones at all, or were you only using
I didn't even know about the new ones. Yeah, they were pretty, I mean, they'd been PL mounted, you know, some time ago. But then he created a whole new housing for it.
I wonder if I mean, I guess you can buy them right now. I'm looking at them. A new Petzval 85 lens. So I think it's sort of like a recreation. Well, it is a recreation because it's new. But Petzval 85 art lens. It looks like there's only just the 85. If you guys listening know any more about this, let me know, because I'm definitely interested in this. I think this is really cool.
Yeah, I love it at the wider. I would have loved to have like a 35 or some, you know, because it just becomes, the wider end, it becomes so much more dramatic with the effect where, you know, you're seeing more of the world get thrown out of focus. So we had the 85, but we almost always used the 58, and I would have loved to have like a 35 or a 40 in there.
Do they not make them, or you just didn't get them?
I don't think so. Yeah,
I'm not seeing them either. I'm seeing the 80, I'm seeing the 85, and I'm seeing the 58 that you had. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'll put this stuff in the show notes too. If you guys want to check out gocreativeshow.com, we'll put it there. All right. In our last couple of minutes, I want to talk about 1978. You had mentioned that you were using zooms for this. This is my favorite of the three. I love this one. And it takes place in 1978 on a campground, lots of exteriors, but you also had these really nice, very warm looking evening shots, which I thought was such a great pairing, because all of the evening shots with those warm tungsten lights are very inviting and very warm and comfy, and it kind of gives you these nostalgic teenage camp feeling. But there's a creepiness to it, because certainly there's a killer running around killing everybody. But it was a great blend of inviting you and luring you in, but also terrifying you and making you scared. So I thought the way that you blended those two sorts of feelings in the 1978 one was really unique, and I just loved it. So can kind of an open-ended question there, but I'm curious just
That's
your
great.
approach to 1978. Maybe start with the zoom lenses. Why did you choose zooms for that? You'd said it just was more, it sort of harkened back to the days of filmmaking at that time period.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we hadn't had any zooms, up until that point, and partly it's like, okay, well, what can we throw into the mix,
What can we
going
do
forward?
that's
That
different?
this different, just to differentiate it. And we had so little prep at that point because originally another team was going to be doing 1978. They were going to have a lot more prep because they would have been prepping while we were shooting. And then we kind of found out at the last minute that we were going to be doing it, which was awesome because originally Lee was going to direct all three, but it just meant that we didn't have a lot of prep time. So we had to basically just like decide what we were doing. We very quickly decided on 2 steady cams going forward because we'd be able to use them both often at the same time and to really, run with that technology because we didn't have time to lay track as well. We were going to be on all this uneven ground at the summer camp and whatnot. And the zooms were just like kind of a no-brainer. We're like, yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. We threw them in for like a handful of scenes, but I think they had a kind of cool place in there. We still mostly stuck with the same prime lenses that Dan, the T series that he detuned for us and gave these really weird, funky flares, and that had like this kind of magenta cast to them, and a lot more halation and everything. But just the location of that summer camp was so awesome and really lent itself well to the sunny day exteriors that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, there hadn't been a lot of sunshine in part 1, 1994. So it was fun to just kind of like say, all right, now we're in this like happy 70s, kind of golden era. A lot of the films that I think of from that era that are iconic to me, obviously The Godfather, but also like Badlands and even like the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all have this kind of like golden sunny look to them, along with
I was getting Texas Chainsaw Massacre, definitely.
Nice.
Definitely.
Yeah, so we found a LUT. It was actually the only film where I just kind of like randomly found this LUT like the day before we started shooting on Lutify. They did a pretty good job of kind of bringing out some of those golden tones. And then we would just warm up our sunshine, often use tungsten for our sunshine. And inside the dark wooded interiors of the summer camp, you could throw a lot of light around because it's dark wood everywhere. So you add a little haze, throw some hard sun in there, and then bounce it where you can. And when it would bounce off of the dark wood, it would create very beautiful warm light on the actor's face. And then we would use our same little Titans, in their little booklight configuration to come in and kind of like supplement that. So there's a lot of like skip bounces from the lighting side, and really wanting to, have the day scenes feel the strength of the sun, feel like you're in summer, just having fun. There's obviously always going to be some sex, some skin and all that. And so, it's kind of like leaning into that. And then when we get to the night stuff, it becomes a different look from 1994 night, because now you're tungsten interior at the summer camp. So it's more like kind of old school warmed up pools of tungsten light with these kind of gnarly greenish uncorrected fluorescent lights. So it kind of creates its own palette that's really driven by the location, but then you're just accentuating the elements of that you like, and always having the conversations about moonlight and what that's going to look like. We wanted to go harder with the light for 1978 because 1994 was really soft. So it's like, let's not be afraid, not normally on a face, but just have harder slashes of light, and that can like bounce off something and create a softer light on the face. But
and that makes a lot of sense when you've got sun and moon as kind of and not overcast sun and moon. Like the actual, sun and moon light is harder. It's a harsher light.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's always that balance of wanting it to feel naturalistic, but also what we've been, what we find aesthetically pleasing, what we've been educated that things should look like on the screen, and playing with, we weren't afraid to go kind of bluish with the moonlight for that one in particular, harkening back to film like Halloween, which was kind of a big reference for us, of course, from the 70s.
That's actually a question from Christopher Sousa on Instagram. One of our listeners wanted to know if early John Carpenter was inspiration. And I think it's clear, especially in the 70s episode 2.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the setting of it was a little bit more Friday the 13th, but as far as what we were aspiring to achieve, as far as like an iconic, great slasher film, Halloween all the way. And so, my lookbook, had some images from that you just kind of like keep kicking around your head. And it's never like there was the light bulb in the closet scene where really wanted to have a swinging light bulb, which they did at the end of Halloween. So we managed to get that in when the axe attack in the closet is happening with Ziggy and the Nightwing killer. And that was a lot of fun to have the light swinging around all over the place.
Do you have a favorite kill from the series, or from the trilogy rather?
Ooh, favorite kill. I mean, I really like. I mean, it's so gruesome. It's hard to say favorite, but like when Ziggy's dying at the end in 1978, I just love this moment. And it was Lee's idea when the camera's craning up into the sky and she's getting axed in slow motion. It's very gruesome, but it's beautiful as well, but it's mostly gruesome. And then the camera cranes up into the air just as she's dying. And then it reverses the move and starts going back in. And the man who stole the world is playing. I mean, I really like that as like a cinematic moment. But as far as like a proper horror kill, I have to say the bread slicer scene.
I know. Sure. How can you not? How can you not? Well, I have to be honest with you. When I went into this trilogy, I was thinking to myself, because I have to see a lot of stuff for Go Creative Show. And, oftentimes I'm not able to see the whole thing because, I mean, how many hours are there in a day? I'm still running a business, people. So I got to do what I got to do. But when I went into this, I honestly was thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, it'll be fun, whatever. I was thinking, okay, it's a teenage kind of slasher film, R.L. Stine recreation, whatever. I have to say I really, really enjoyed it. Like it's just fun. It's like a great summer kind of slasher film trilogy, and it looks good. And, the differences between the 3 films really do keep you engaged. So I think you and the whole team did such a great job on this. And I think anybody listening, if you haven't already, check it out. And congratulations to you, Caleb, for your first feature film being 3 feature films. It's like, that's kind of amazing that you got an opportunity to do all 3. And they're great.
It was an incredible opportunity. And I mean, it was really Lee's baby. She developed this from the get-go. She got it off the ground. She was in the writer's room the whole time.
Yeah.
And was really obviously both the quality control and, the one who was able to keep the whole thing in her head at all times and keep us all honest to the story and kind of push us to do our best work too. It was just such an unbelievable opportunity to get to work with her and the rest of the team. And,
well, hook us up. I'd love to have her on. We don't get to talk to a lot of directors, so I think it'd be fun if you think she'd be down for it. Yeah, connect her to Connor, our producer. I mean, that would be a blast.
Absolutely. All right. Well, ping her. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, she's the greatest.
Well, I want to thank you again. Great job. Where can people go to find out more about you?
CalebHeymann.com. Pretty easy. Instagram is just Caleb Heymann, HeyMann, like Heyman with 2 N's, and that's it.
I'm looking at your Instagram now. Lots of cool stuff here. You guys are going to like it. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Caleb Heymann, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll have to have you back maybe for Stranger Things when it comes out.
I would love to. Yeah, when it comes out early next year, I would absolutely love to. Thank you, man. It was great chatting with you.
All right, I want to thank Caleb Heymann for coming on the show and talking to us all about his work on the trilogy, Fear Street on Netflix. I really did enjoy it. I wasn't just, saying that for the guests. Like, I enjoyed it. It was a fun watch, and all three of them look so different. It's just cool to see, how we incorporated all of the different looks and time period into one cohesive season. So check it out for yourself on Netflix. I also want to thank Connor Crosby, our producer. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com, and Dave Siegel, SiegelSound.com, for mixing, mastering, and making the show sound so good. Of course, you can follow Go Creative Show on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And if you're interested in what I'm doing with my production company, you can find me at Ben Consoli, on Instagram and Twitter. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.